Okay, now I am recording. And so far this week, you've covered Docker on Monday. I believe Jonathan walked you through spinning up Flask and a PostgreSQL database and writing Docker files for both of those things. Then yesterday, you learned about Poly and how to write custom XML files to send it so that it can change and fine tune its pronunciations. We're gonna do a bit more of that today, but we're gonna do it within React. And we are going to do this through the AWS SDK, which we haven't interacted with yet. So far, we've been showing you how to work with AWS through the console in your browser and then through the command line in your terminal. Now, with the SDK, you'll see how to integrate services like Poly into an application. So, where do we begin? Before we jump into the code itself, let's run through some of the benefits of React, some of what makes it so popular. Some of you have already learned a lot about React and have had a lot of experience with it because you've been through the full stack program. But for those of you that haven't, I've tried my best to highlight the key points, right? So somebody tell me, what's a simple full stack architecture?
Like the different uh, frameworks.
Sure.
You could do your front end in React and JavaScript, your back end in Django and Python, and use a Postgres database, just like we did in full stack.
Exactly. Exactly. And out of curiosity, why do you think this tech stack is so popular?
JavaScript
It's
is, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that it's pretty versatile. There are many applications that you could create with that.
Yes, definitely. Nick, were you gonna say anything else?
No, nothing worth listening to.
I mean, that's subjective, but I'm always curious to hear how others interpret all of this. And, part of it too is, if all of you are looking for careers at the end of this, maybe not all of you, but whoever is, getting in the habit of talking through and thinking about these things is going to be important, especially for the job search phase. So it might be difficult for some of you and painful, but we will continue to flex those muscles. I liked what you said, Kathleen, about it being versatile. That versatility really does um, contribute to its popularity, right? Not only is it versatile, but it's easy to use. Traditional HTML would require you to, well, would require your browser to completely re-render everything that you're seeing when you're interacting with it. And the React library was designed to solve this issue, to make a more responsive user experience. Because what React does is it tracks and updates things like state, right? Values and variables your application might need. And it's able to mount and unmount components into the DOM within your browser such that it doesn't require your browser to completely rebuild the DOM every time an update is made, like it traditionally would be with simple HTML. Who is not familiar with DOMs and doesn't know what it is?
I was actually just going to ask what that means.
Sure. Okay. So DOMs are probably if I had my slides, I had a little comic about dominatrices, but that's not what that's not the kind of DOMs we're talking about. We're talking about the document object model within your browser. And what that is essentially a file hierarchy. Your browser takes all of the HTML that you write into the app or whatever you're trying to serve, and it interprets it. It builds every set of tags as an element within that hierarchy, within that document tree. So if we just look at, just real briefly, document object model, this is generally the kind of rendering that you would see for it. You could see that basically within your browser, all of these elements are created. That's why when you are writing HTML, you'll see the head, you'll see the body. These are all just standard components that are read by the DOM to render your page, to render what you're seeing in your browser. So that said, React allows us to manipulate state within our browser in a more flexible and responsive manner. That's why React is so popular. It's not the only tool out there. There are also other very strong front-end frameworks like Angular, but React is the one that we have chosen to teach at Platoon. Okay, so now that you know why we're using React, let's talk a bit about why we're using AWS. Well, similar to React, it's because of the popularity, right? Popular doesn't necessarily mean that it's better or that it's the best, but if hireability is the goal, then exposing you to the most popular platforms and frameworks out there should, in theory, improve your chances of landing a job. Now, the cloud infrastructure itself, we've already been talking about this for like the last 3 weeks. It's really just an alternative to traditional means, having your own servers and hosting and serving your own content through these servers. But that comes with costs. That comes with maintenance costs and operational costs, installation costs, and you could bypass all of that by using platforms like AWS. Now, that doesn't mean that once you land in an organization that you'll probably only be using AWS. There's always legacy applications, right? So when you get to wherever you land, if it's a bigger company, well, the larger the company is, the more history that it has, the more likely it's going to have legacy systems that still utilize maybe traditional on-premises servers. Your organization may have a strategy where it uses a combination of cloud architecture and traditional on-prem infrastructure. And so being exposed to both of these things will give you experience with both areas and seeing how we would integrate our front end into a cloud platform like AWS side by side with seeing how we would integrate it into a Flask backend and PostgreSQL database should, through contrast, give you a better idea overall of how the entire tech stack works, how it takes and processes information throughout its flow. Okay, so we're going to do a bit of both. We're going to talk through, well, not just talk through, actually. We're going to create a React app that uses the Poly service through the AWS SDK. And then for the challenge, we are going to plug it back into Flask. Okay, that's about it. I think all of this more or less says that. Maybe let's do this real quick because I think this should be pretty fast. Containerization, right? So for those of you especially that have not had a lot of Docker experience, open up your terminals and let's run through this. It's super quick, super brief, should be relatively painless. I'm going to make a very simple React project. Let me try to get my screen into a good state. And also just want to double check. Am I sharing the right screen? Okay, cool. All right. I am going to stop this, exit out of that, go up one directory, go up another directory. I'm just gonna make a temporary folder because, like I said, this is supposed to be fast, right? So let's go into this new project directory. Let's go ahead and make a React project using npm create Vite. Vite is French for fast, and it really is fast compared to the traditional npx create React app, and it's super easy to use. You could pass in things like template and React to, well, start off with a template, and then it's going to walk you through an interactive session within your terminal. So,
Julius, can you zoom in, please?
sure, sure, sure. Okay, is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. So, we're going to say no to using this experimental feature because we have no use case for it right now, and it's experimental. And then we're going to, might as well just hit yes for this. It's going to go ahead and use the Node package manager to install everything it needs. Like, look how fast that was. We've got a working React application. Cool. So let me just try to get into this browser because it's been opening up in a different browser. And oh, you should be seeing this very basic boilerplate React app that just very quickly demos how it manages state. If we go into our application, which is inside of a different directory, okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this. I'm going to command click this, and voila, I'm where I want to be. If I go to my app, this is still the wrong folder. If I go to my app.jsx, not app.py, I can do things like change this text to say code platoon. And as soon as I save, we see in our browser that it updates. This is one of the, in my opinion, best features of React. It reacts to your changes. It allows you to work and develop really fast. So I just wanted to highlight that, and let's see what was next. I think that was it. No, actually, no. Now we're going to containerize this. So that's actually the goal. We are going to now create a Docker file, and I don't have to leave this running. I can probably just go ahead, Control C to get out of that and try to like remove some of this clutter. I'm going to make a Docker file, and I'm going to just take this. Also, maybe just talk through it a bit. So who can tell me, or actually, yeah, somebody walk me through this Docker file and what it means line by line. Cam.
Yep. So I guess from, I don't know, that node 22, where's that coming from?
So this is a pre-built image that exists on Docker Hub. And
Okay.
this notation here basically is we're specifying the image that we want on the left. And to the right of this colon, we can specify a version. Let's go to Docker Hub and see what this looks like. You could think of Docker Hub sort of like a library,
Mhm.
and it's going to have all these different images. I don't want to go to that one. Let's see this one. and we can see here's a PyTorch image, here's LangChain, here's Python. These are the images that you would have access to, and there are variations to these images, and that's why we're seeing the dash Alpine. Basically, well, Cam, how would you describe an image based on what you guys learned on Monday?
What was Monday? Was that Docker?
Yep.
Image. Hmm, it's a good question.
Okay.
Image.
Did you guys run any commands with you guys ran like Docker run probably, right? And Docker build. Um, when you
Yeah.
run, yeah, when you run Docker build, you're creating an image, and when you use Docker run, you're spinning up a container based off of that image. You could think
What's
of
the
it,
image though?
well, it's like an image. It's like a snapshot, basically.
Oh, okay, okay. Snapshot of anything that's in that container.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And that's why there are different versions, right? So this exact same code, the code that's used to compile, um, I don't know, a project that runs Node, that can come with different packages pre-installed, right? You've already actually seen a variation of this with Amazon images, right? When you make an EC2, you select an image. We've worked with Ubuntu, we've worked with AWS 2023, I think. And both of those images are basically snapshots of an operating system, of a Unix-based operating system. And these different snapshots will come pre-installed with different packages, which is why, as we've been going through these exercises, there are times where we have to use yum. There are times where we have to use DNF. These, this is because different variations of even the same image, right, can come pre-packaged with different libraries. So that's what this is. We're just specifying, okay, we want to grab from Docker Hub the node image, version 22, and we want Alpine. Alpine is like a very lightweight build. And so you'll see probably throughout the cohort, we'll be using Alpine a lot because they'll just speed things up. We don't need a whole complex system just to demo the things that we're demoing, right? So we create a Docker file. Let's go ahead and add from node 22 Alpine. My autocomplete here is asking if I want to do as build. We'll talk about that more later. Let's continue to step through this. Now, what's this next part, Cam?
Yeah, within that image, it's letting us, or we're telling it that the working directory is the folder called app.
Hmm.
And then within there, within the working directory, I'm assuming, or the image, copy all the packages that have a .json, or it says package whatever .json, right?
Yeah, yeah,
All of
the
it.
box card. Yep.
The space dot forward slash, I don't know what that means.
In the present working directory. So remember,
Oh,
dot
dot.
is just a symbol for our present working
Oh,
directory.
okay. So within the app working directory, copy everything that says package whatever .json, and then run the npm install um, code,
Yep.
and then go ahead.
I was just going to say, yep, the command.
Command, yes, the command, and then copy dot dot. That's the home directory, or is that a dot space dot?
Yes, dot space dot.
What does that mean?
So you can think of the Docker file as a set of instructions, right?
Hmm.
So we're copying because we're taking a snapshot of our project, right? We're saying copy from this project, the directory that I'm running this Docker file from, copy all of it into the work directory inside of the container that we're going to run.
Mm-hmm.
So the first path is where you're executing the Docker file from. The second path references the working directory. And since we're just saying using the defaults, we do dot dot on each one, right? Like
Exactly.
just here and here. Okay.
Yep. Cool. And yeah, let's just take this home, Cam. What else?
I don't know if we're gonna go home, but I'll try my best. And then after you do that, you're gonna run the command npm run build, which I guess you're building your what are you building? The actual Docker container? I thought we were already in that.
No, this is where we build the React app. And I don't think you guys have actually run these commands yet. We worked with React just once so far, as far as I know, and that was your first week. That's when we hopped onto an EC2 on Saturday and we installed React using NPM on the EC2.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's probably why I'm throwing errors. Probably need to install npm.
Right. So if you're trying to run it right now, we're not doing that just yet, but
Okay.
yeah, it's yes, these next two lines are trying to run commands that you would normally use in your terminal. It's running them inside of the container that it's currently building.
Cool. Then you're gonna expose port 3000,
Hmm.
and then you're telling it, yeah, we did that last class. Everything in the quotation and comma is like you're just telling it exactly what to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, somebody tell me, why are we using command to run these commands when we were not using command up here?
Because we're in the containers terminal now, right?
When exactly?
When?
Yeah, at what point are you referring to?
After you run npm run build. Like that was pretty cool. Last class is like it has its own terminal.
Hmm.
And that the last thing command is telling that's how you can actually know. I don't know.
You're very close. You're very close.
Is
So
it a
you're
command? Is it
sorry.
referring to you running from your terminal outside of Docker? That is why we are using the command.
You were breaking up at the start, Edison. Can you say that again?
Oh, I said, is it because that we've already built the container and the app, and we're trying to run the app from our terminal, which is outside of Docker?
Very close. Very close. So the command is going to be run within the container. But what you said about the build, that first part that had already completed, and what you said, Cam, about us already being inside of that terminal, essentially us being represented by the cursor because we've specified the work directory. We build an image, or sorry, a container using the image. And then when we run it, this is essentially the kickoff command, right? So all of this, all of this only used to run, or sorry, it's only used when building the container. If you place variables in here, they're not automatically going to transfer to the container itself, which is running a system at this point, right? So we specify the command that we want to run inside of the container using CMD. And that's why we have to do it with like this comma notation. And that's why we could only do it once. We can't just continue to run commands from the Docker file because this Docker file is essentially saying by using the command that we're done building, we're going to run, and all this build stuff essentially vanishes. Um, well, it's still cached on your local machine, but it's no longer running in a way that you can continue to run these commands. All of the commands from here on out are going to be run inside of your terminal, or sorry, the terminal of your container that is running. So you would have to, when you're writing commands, you would have to either exec into that container to essentially, it's like SSHing into it or SSHing onto a node. Or you could also run commands inside of the container through layers of Docker commands in your terminal. We'll see all of that more. I'm sure I'm tossing a lot at you guys, but we'll, through repetition, get this stuff to stick. Cool. So that is a Docker file. We now have a Docker file that we could use to spin up our React app. And from here, we would run Docker build. And let's talk about some of the syntax. We use -t to tag the build so that we have a name to associate with the image. If I do a Docker image, you could do either Docker image ls, Docker image list, or even just Docker images. This is going to list your images on your machine. We'll see that they have IDs. Let me stretch this out so it's a little cleaner. They have IDs. They have tags. It tells us when they were created. It tells us the size. Notice how some of these say none. That's because they weren't tagged. So to tag is basically to give it an easy reference point. Otherwise, you'd have to be using the image ID whenever you wanted to interact with it, right? And that is tedious. So let's go ahead and give it a tag. You'll also want to give it a tag if you were to upload it or share it so that it'd be easier, again, to call, but also so that it would make sense to other developers. We are calling this one, this is the temp project. We're just going to call this one React container. The -t stands for tag, and then we're passing in this string value React container to tag, and we are pointing to where the Docker file is. It's in this directory. Hit enter. It's going to do its thing. And once it's built, we could use Docker images again to now see that we've got a new image. React container at the very top, tagged with latest, and it was created 4 seconds ago. Cool. So now that it's been built, we can run it. And like I've said a few times, when we run something from an image, we're creating a container. Because the image itself is just a snapshot, right? We could take that snapshot and use it virtually an infinite number of times. That's part of what makes this flow so handy, right? Like we can run this image that's serving a React app, and we could go into that image and that container and do a bunch of stuff and really mess up the app. And then we'll just exit out, delete that container, and spin up a new one. And then we'll have a fresh, clean environment again. So to see what containers you have, you could just do a Docker PS. Right now, I don't have anything running. I might have some containers that are stopped though. So I could use -a, similar to how we would use -a when using ls to see all, in this case, not hidden, but all the stopped containers. Okay, so we see these containers. If I do a Docker run, whatever I named my container, I've already forgotten, React container. And we're going to pass in some ports. we're gonna do a bit of port mapping. So we do -P for port, pretty easy to remember. The port that we want to open on our local machine is 80, and we want to map, sorry, 3000, and we want to map that to 80, which is the default port for local host. Basically, what you see when you sign into a browser. Your browser utilizes port 80 by default to access the World Wide Web, which I don't think anyone calls it that anymore, right? Um, React container. Yes, I think I'm good. I'm going to run it. And it's telling me that connections are not being accepted. And I'm not seeing what I'm expecting to see. Let's see. Oh, whoops. Did I have that backwards? Or no, that actually, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Sorry. Let's see. No, I think I just had a really brief moment of confusion here. I had that totally backwards, didn't I? We're doing 8080 to 3000. And let's run that. Now let's go to localhost 8080. And we see our React app. Now, if we wanted to do what we were doing earlier, changing the title, we can't do it the way that we did before, right? Because if I try to change it from here, it's not going to do anything because I'm changing the local code. I'm changing the source of where this image and where this container came from. And that's at this point already completely disconnected from this container. So I would have to do something like Docker exec. I could do a -IT for interactive, and I forget what the T stands for. Um, and then I'm going to pass in the container name, react-container. And then I'm going to pass in a command like shell just to spin up a shell environment. Okay. Oh, I think I named the image React container. Right. So the container itself, I don't think has a name. It's really hard to read this. Oh, yeah, it has this randomized name because I didn't give it one. So I would have to actually run elegant Blackburn or my container ID. So Docker exec into my ID or into the container using this ID with the shell command. And now we see I'm inside of my container. See how like this indicator here is different. If I do an ls, we see exactly what we saw on our local machine because it was copied over, right? We copied over everything inside of that React directory into the working directory of the container. So if we go into source where all of our code lives, and we can't run code, the code command doesn't work in here, right? So if I do this, it's going to complain because I'm no longer in my terminal. I'm in somebody else's house. I'm inside the container that's running. So I can't use code. I'm going to use I'm going to use Vim. So I'm going to use VI for Vim, and I'm going to say app.jsx. And now Vim, which is a pre-installed text editor, is allowing me to interact with this code. And now if I change the code here, there it is. That's what I'm looking for. Now, if I change the code here by first taking my cursor over to it, then hitting I for insert, I can insert, could hit escape to get out of that mode, colon to call this, I don't know, this command input, and use W to write and quit to exit out once I'm done writing. The bang is so it does what I want, no questions asked. Okay, cool. Now, you did not see what I was hoping we would see. Can someone tell me why it didn't update? Yes, okay.
I remember we had to like source it again of some sorts, right?
Is
To,
it because we're now in debug mode?
What about debug mode?
No, the React. Debug mode, it calls itself again. Tries to like rerun the app, refresh the app.
So what should I do to refresh the app?
Hit F5 in your browser or whatever the equivalent command is.
All right, trying that.
Do you have to rerun the command to serve? That very last command in the Docker build file, the Docker file?
Yeah, should we try that?
Let's do it. If it breaks, we can just do it all over, right?
Exactly. All right, so let's try that. So npm serve, sorry, no, not serve. Sorry, not npm. We're just going to do serve -s this -l 3000. Let's actually do 3001 because that's already being used. But we can't do 3001 because we wouldn't be able to see it inside of our local browser because we haven't mapped that port, right? So even though it's running here, we can't see it. And what we would have to do is basically spin down what was serving it before so that we could spin it back up with the right port. And I do not remember how to stop serving this from here. Okay, so um, but you get the idea, right? I feel like I'm spending way too long on this. What I would have to do to get this to update is to reserve the application. And I would have to, right, stop the currently running server to do that. But that's really the gist of what we would be trying to do. There's, I think, no point in spending any more time on it. Let's go exit out of here and let's do a Docker stop on this container. So I'm going to use Docker PS again because I don't remember the container name. I'm just going to highlight this. Well, actually, I copied it, but oh, sorry, I think I made it smaller. But I'm also going to just show you how I can use just the first few digits of this, sorry, characters, because it looks like it's not just digits, characters of this container ID to reference it, right? So if I do a Docker stop DBE, that's good enough. Docker can recognize that this is the image I'm trying to stop because there are no other containers. There are no other containers that start with that ID. Now that it's stopped, I can remove it, just erase it from the surface of this earth by doing an RM with this value again. And now it's gone. If I do a Docker PSA, it's no longer here. Cool. All right, so that was probably not as fast as I wanted, but that is basically how we set up a React app and how we create a container to containerize that app. Let's do something a little more complicated. Let's now build a React app that uses the AWS SDK to let us hit Poly. All right, so I'm gonna go up one directory. I'm gonna make a new one. I like to be organized. So this is where we're at. I'm gonna make my project npm. I don't know, not very creative, but I'm just gonna call it voice generator 2. I'm going to cd into this directory, and then I'm going to create. So let's go ahead and create. Actually, I'm not going to use this template this time, just so you could see what Vite looks like without that template. It's interactive still, and it lets me pick a framework I want to work with. I'm going to select React. I'm going to select the variant, and I'm going to say no again to this question. Nah, I don't want to start because I have to run some additional install commands, right? So I'll do the install myself, and then I will install these additional packages. So what we're doing is we're going to be installing the Poly client taken from the AWS SDK. SDK stands for Software Development Kit. And we're also going to install a library called Lucid E React. I don't know how that's pronounced. What that does is it just gives us access to some nifty little icons so that we can make our app pretty with minimum effort. So npm install AWS SDK client -poly. It's going to install all of that. Now we're going to set up some credentials. What we're doing right now is we're working essentially within a development environment, right? And what that means is we're developing the app. Like we're still writing code. Like it doesn't really exist yet, right? Once we get it to a point where it does essentially everything we want it to, we could push it to a staging environment where we prepare it for deployment to a production environment. Since we're working in a development environment locally, we can just grab the credentials that we need to interact with the SDK, basically our AWS key and secret, and we could toss it in an environment file. So code.env, we are going to add 3 variables. We're going to specify the region we want, and we're going to pass in our key and our secret access key. And then we're going to save. Because we're working with Vite, we have to append Vite in front of all of these variables. Otherwise, Vite is not going to be able to read it. So let's save. I actually already have this env file somewhere else. So I'm going to remove this one. And I'm just going to take the one I already have. It's got the values that I want. Move that from the previous project into, actually, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to copy it into my present working directory. LSA, confirm, I've got my env. Okay, so now that we've got our React app set up to work with AWS, or a better way of saying it is we've given our React app access to our AWS account, we can begin writing some code. So let's go ahead and make first the poly service. So poly service.js. Let's add some code. First, we're going to import. We're going to import the poly client. This syntax here basically is we have to use the curly brackets when we're importing not a default export, but just, I guess, a regular export, right? So within this client poly script inside of the AWS SDK, we see that it's exporting poly client. Now we also want this other command, synthesize speech, and we're going to hit save. Now that we've imported these, we have to use them, right? So let's start by creating a variable. And within this variable, we're going to instantiate the poly client that we've imported. So all of this should seem very familiar because we've talked about this when writing our Python code. The only difference is the syntax. And of course, I mean, that's not the only difference. There is more than that, but let's not go down that rabbit hole just yet. I'm going to pass in the environment variable for the region and for the access key and the secret key. It's going to want this funky syntax. That's just how it is. That's just how Vite likes it. So we're going to go ahead and complete that. I'm going to add some credentials. And then we're going to save again, because saving constantly is good practice. Okay. Save. Now let's do the generate speech. Sure. So how this function works, and basically, I don't really know how it works. I would have to read documentation because this isn't something that I work with all the time, right? This is why it's commonly said that 80% of being a developer is documentation. I think I point out somewhere in the lesson that there's a lot, because there is a lot to memorize. No one should be feeling, I don't know, bad about not being able to memorize everything. What I'm hoping is that you all pick up on the foundational and the fundamental aspects of what we're teaching, right? Basically, how everything connects to one another, the what, why, and how of what we're doing, rather than the commands themselves, because that's really not as important. Things like commands, things like what you pass into a command, you could always look that up, and you could always search it. You could always ask ChatGPT to remind you what something is. The more important thing is you get a strong grasp on the concepts that we are teaching. Okay. I am going to just go ahead and copy this actually. No, it looks like it's giving me what I want. I'm just gonna hit that. It's doing all that because I've already typed this out before. And just to be very brief about this, you can infer from this that this function will generate speech. It accepts text as a required parameter, and an optional parameter, voice ID. And we know that it's optional because of this equal sign. Basically, this is saying, if you don't pass me the voice ID, I'm just going to assume that you want Joanna. So again, we use this format new to instantiate this command. And we're going to have some safety nets, basically. We use a try catch to return an error if something goes wrong. Okay, so let's now add a response. Basically, we're going to well, let's talk about await real quick. Await, if you don't know, is like the jelly to the peanut butter that is async. Um, this is asynchronous, which means the code, the interpreter doesn't have to wait for this to finish before it continues. That's why we have to explicitly say await. Don't try to assign this value to this response variable until this has completed running, because otherwise it's going to throw an error, right? And if we don't use async, then it's going to stall. Like it might error out for an entirely different reason because it's trying to assign a value to a variable while it's still waiting for the server to respond, right? Because when we use the SDK, what we're actually doing behind the scenes is we're hitting AWS servers and we are requesting to run the logic that AWS is hosting on its servers. And that's why it has to be asynchronous. We have to wait for those servers to respond and send us back a response. So that's what we're doing here. We're calling the poly instance that we created. We're calling the send command, and we're passing in this synthesized speech command that we created. Okay. So now that we've done that, let's also create some additional variables. Here we've got chunks. This is just going to be an empty array. And then we're going to create a response. And then we'll create a conditional where basically what is true referring to?
It it's creating an infinite loop, but it's got a break in there, so it'll actually stop at some point.
Right on. Yeah, definitely. So basically, like this is guaranteed to run. And then it's going to stop when it no longer needs to run. And it's going to essentially collect the chunks that it needs to into this array. And we have to chunk again because there are limits to the size of data that is sent over through APIs. And well, I'm assuming how audio stream get reader is designed is that it's able to avoid hitting these limits by chunking up the response. So we're then going to combine all of that into a single array. And then I'm going to just auto format all this, hit save. This is our poly services script. And we've got to talk about a few of JavaScript's quirks. Now let's build an audio utilities file because this service alone isn't enough to do what we want it to do. What we're trying to do in React here is we're trying to build an interface for users to send text, receive an audio file, and then play that audio file. This only connects to the poly service. It doesn't do anything with actual audio. And what is this missing bracket? Or let's see. if we can do a quick fix. No, definitely not all that. How do I exit out of this? Oh, let's see here. Oh, here it is. I think this is it. It must have auto. Nope, that's not it. This wraps the async function. Did I forget something? Let's see. We have our import. We create the poly client. Oh, I definitely skipped this. We to specify the voices that we have available, right? So that the user can select from these different voices. And here is where I think we're having, nope, not yet. We start that generate speech. We have a closing tag here. Got my, this looks wrong. Did I paste something in the wrong spot? Let's see, response is right below where we define the MP3. Oh, it's probably because I keep hitting right to autocomplete. Like this looks completely wrong. Whoops. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that nonsense. This is why you don't just blindly trust AI. It's just guessing regarding what you want. Okay, so we've done our poly services. Let's go ahead and make a utilities files. Basically, I'm going to call it utils, assuming that if we were going to actually continue to build this out, these utility functions might be useful to other parts of our application. So we're going to toss it into a utils directory. We're going to say audio utils.js. And let's see, I'm going to just copy and paste all this in the rest of time. And let me just see if there's anything handy to say. Basically, it just does the things it needs to do for the browser to run the audio, play the audio. Okay, so now let's actually create the component that plays the audio. This component, as you can see, is calling some of the utility functions that we created above, and it's going to run them in a way that it needs to for us to play our audio file. So source, components, audio player.jsx. Standard practice in React is to throw the code that refers to like the actual UI, like the front end, into a components directory. Services like poly services.js, that runs in the background. That doesn't really have anything, like it doesn't have anything tangible or visible for us to interact with. The audio player is where all of that tangible stuff comes from. This is where we actually see the UI. So let's go ahead and create that. And we're going to make it .jsx instead of JavaScript because you'll see in a bit, we need to return a very specific set of data. All right, so I think all of this is, we've talked about state, how React lets you save state. It's got a very simple syntax for that. Basically, what you have here is your getter. It's a variable, and you use this to get the value of state that you've stored. the state that we start off with here is a default value. And this is our setter. We call this is like a function, basically. We call this to update state. We would call this and we pass in the value that we would want to replace the existing value. And that's state in a nutshell. Use effect might look a little intimidating at first, but it's actually pretty simple because it's really only taking in two arguments, right? And this whole thing is a single function. It's called an anonymous function because we see these parentheses, we recognize them from where we create functions, but there's no name before it, right? So that's why it's called an anonymous function. It doesn't need a name. It's going to be used by this use effect. Specifically only when audio data is updated. So basically, this first parameter is the effect that we want when the second parameter is used, hence the name use effect. Okay, so that's use effect in a nutshell. Now let's add another use effect. This one is going to set up and clean up some. Actually, there is cleanup. There's the remove listeners. Some listeners, and basically things like listeners. These are all, if you have experience working with HTML, you'd find that a lot of this is already very familiar. React is just essentially allowing us to utilize HTML and how it's designed in a way that gives us a lot of flexibility, additional flexibility. So we're going to add all of these functions. And then this is the one thing I wanted to point out here. This very large response at the end is the HTML that we see, except the syntax itself is not exactly HTML. In HTML, we would require a header, a body. This is essentially like a section of that, right? This is called JSX. It's essentially JavaScript XML file. So XML, just like the files we worked with earlier this week. And notice, just like the lexicons and the SSMLs, we use this tagging pattern where every element created by the DOM is comprised of an opening and a closing tag. So everything has to have an equivalent closing tag. And that's what that leading slash is. It's saying, hey, we're done with this wrapper. And we can nest elements within elements to pass values and state down from top to bottom, from parent to child. Okay, so let's go ahead and throw that in there. Let's auto format. Let's save. I believe that's good. I think this needs saving. I see the white dot. And now we update the main application. I don't know if this is the right one. Nope, this path is different. So let's go ahead and get the correct app.jsx. And we're going to update this. This is all the boilerplate code. We don't need any of this. So we could just go ahead and replace it. We're importing all the things we created. We're defining some states. We are defining a method. Notice again the async because it has to be asynchronous. And then we're going to return all of this JSX that is going to be rendered by the browser to construct the DOM. All right, save. And now we can finally test our app. Okay. Let's see, where are we? Let's do an npm run dev. Like I mentioned earlier, we are essentially working in a development environment. I'm gonna command click that. Oof. And then there is an error. Oh, I think I might be missing a period. So let's see here. And also, whenever we see errors, feel free, at least when I'm teaching, feel free to just throw out suggestions or an answer for what you think is causing it. So in this case, we are being told that we have an import that failed inside of our app.jsx. It can't find services poly service. Probably have a typo somewhere, kind of a very sloppy typer. Or actually, yeah, ls, let's do an ls to see what's inside of source. Services, that looks right. Let's see what's inside of services. Whoops, forgot my source. There's a poly services.js, not a poly service.js. Okay, so now that I have the correct import, because I named my file something different than the example, now we could run dev again. Let's refresh. We see our voice generator with some really bad styling. I don't know why there's this massive gap to the right, but we can see if it works. Get in the habit of using F12 to open up your dev console when working with front-end applications, and even when working on back-end applications, anything that you're going to interact with in a browser. It's a very handy, nifty tool. It's called a dev console. It will help you solve many, many problems. Okay, so it's cool that I'm not seeing any errors. I'm going to try, I don't know, hello world. Very creative, I know. We can see that we could choose between the voices that we specified, and we could generate the speech, and we can
Hello world.
hit play. So now we've interacted with Poly through the SDK. Cool. All right, that I believe is it for the lab. I guess we could also containerize it. And how are y'all feeling? Do you guys want to just jump in and start on the lab if you haven't started already and do this on your own along with the challenge, or do you want me to demo it?
Demo the challenge?
Oh, no, this last part of the lab.
Oh, the Docker. Yeah, I think getting started. I think, yeah, because I was able to follow along and ultimately got it working.
Mhm.
But I mean, that was just copying what was in there, right? So, efficient walkthrough. Yay. Um, no, I think getting in and trying to do the challenge will be helpful.
Cool. I know. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and open up breakout rooms. I'm gonna stop sharing. Um, and yeah, we've been here for a little over an hour, so go ahead and take a break.